Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is going to be recorded, so feel free to be off camera if you don't feel comfortable with that. Hello, welcome to the 2022 Legislative Kickoff. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Can we go to the next slide? So before we begin, an important note about accessibility. Closed captions will be available and can be viewed by clicking the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen. And the captions are in real time and should accurately reflect the content. Spanish translation is also available. Puede acceder la interpretación en español haciendo clic en interpretación en la parte inferior de la pantalla y seleccionando Spanish. And Mario, if you have anything to say about that, Mario is our interpreter tonight.
No, I think we're good. Just so that I can get assigned as interpreter, that would be great. And then for the folks on the English side, make sure you select the English in case there's going to be interaction between the English and the Spanish. Great. I'm good to go.
Great, thank you, Mario. So we'd like to begin by acknowledging that all land in what is currently known as the United States is unceded indigenous territory, and that California is the occupied land of over 100 tribes. We recognize the painful history upon which the state of California exists, including state-sanctioned and state-funded genocide, displacement, and dispossession of ancestral lands, removal of children from their families, and laws that seek to erase indigenous peoples altogether. And the art you see here is from artist Jackie Fawn, who is Yurok. I wanted to share some of Jackie's words. This art is how I see the vast beauty and rich culture of Native California. From the ancient redwood giants to the concrete towers of the city, California, as the rest of the country, will always be Native land, and it is important to honor and recognize the land we stand upon. This illustration is of a woman standing strong, with the medicines our ancestors prayed with, a two-spirit youth holding the drum and songs of our ancestors, and wearing red for our murdered and missing indigenous peoples, and of an elder that has carried the knowledge of our ancestors for us to carry into future generations. And we encourage everyone to research and understand the indigenous land that you are on. You can find out the native land that you are on by going to native-land.ca, and you can look it up there. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us tonight for our legislative kickoff. My name is Emily Kagapi, and I am the organizing assistant at the ACLU of Northern California, and I'm joining this training from occupied Ramaytush Ohlone territory. Quick rundown for tonight. To start with, our colleagues from California Action will take us through the legislative process and last year's key wins. Then Tanisha will take us through a preview of the bills that we'll be advocating on this year. Finally, Kim, a current volunteer leader, will talk about ways to get involved. And if all goes well, we can wrap up within an hour. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Fred.
Hello, let me see. It's not allowing me to share video, but I hope everyone can hear me okay. My name is Fred Williams. I'm with ACLU Cal Action. I'm one of the newer lobbyists there. I use he, him pronouns. I'm originally from Southern California. And I really have worked around Sacramento, policy legislator for the last 3 or 4 years. It's something that I've always wanted to do. So I find it very much a blessing that I'm able to do it here with the ACLU in a place that has a very good cause. So I think it'd be good if we just begin. Go to the next slide. So how the legislator works. Each one of you, if you're a resident of California, you are represented by 2 members of the state legislature. You have your state assembly member and your state senator. Your state senators are going to have much larger territories. They're going to oversee roughly 1 million people, while your state assembly member is going to be just about half that, depending in certain cases. So your assembly member is going to have a much smaller territory, usually a few cities, a few neighborhoods, while your senator is going to take more like an entire kind of region, for example, something like the East Bay. or you'll have maybe a couple senators over the entire Central Valley. A good way to look up who your state representative is to, if you enter your zip code into Google or your search engine, and then your zip code and possibly your neighborhood, usually your state assembly senator will come up if you just search after that. So, all right, we'll go to the next one. All right, so legislators, what they're responsible for. So legislators here in California are really the bill engines of California. Their primary responsibility is to research, draft, and vote for bills, to push laws essentially through California. When a legislator does so, as they go, every year they have not only a number of bills that they are going to push throughout the year that they are responsible for, that they'll have their name on, that they'll author. They also have a number of bills that they'll be responsible for voting on in passage of their colleagues. So really, their full job, although they will do a lot of local work, they have district offices that you can interface with, that they can help you with, that they can do casework and review, they can work with locals. Their number one and main charter is to draft and pass legislation. Okay, we can go to the next one. So a little bit about how a bill becomes law, and this is really the main charge of the legislator. So if a bill starts in the assembly, it will first be heard by the assembly committees. These committees are groups of consultants, staff who really specialize in a certain area. For example, the Public Safety Committee, you have staff, a lot of them worked in public safety in one way or another. We have public defenders, former district attorneys, former attorneys, former even law enforcement that will work in that committee. So as the bill moves through a committee, they will really debate the merits of the law really down to what I call like the nitty gritty. They will really want to get into the details and the weeds of what happens in this bill, what the ramifications are. There'll be a robust debate and analysis of each bill that comes through within that committee process. And then the members that construct the committee, they will vote on the bill and clear it through the committee. Committees are really that first step and first hurdle for any piece of legislation moving forward, because no bill will reach the assembly floor without first going through the committee process. When on the assembly floor, there will be a lot less debate. It'll be a lot more high-level discussion, but that'll be an opportunity for all of the assembly colleagues to vote on any piece of legislation headed to the floor. So any member that is not on that committee now will have their first opportunity to vote for a bill. Okay, now we can continue to the next. And so what we see in the Senate is kind of the same thing, just reverse. So a Senate bill will do the same thing. It will go to a committee constructed also by specialists in that area. Each bill must be passed through the committee. It can be amended or changed during that time. And then after it passes through that Senate committee, it will head to the Senate floor where the rest of the Senate colleagues will be able to vote on it. One key thing that I want to emphasize here is that once a Senate bill clears the Senate committees, then clears the Senate floor, it will then have to move over to the assembly side and begin the process again on the assembly side. The same for assembly bills. Once an assembly bill moves out of the committee, once it is passed by a majority off of the floor, it will then go up to the Senate, and they will kind of do the same thing, just in opposite houses. Okay, next one. The governor's role. And so one thing to note is that some will say that each resident is represented by 3 members of the legislature, that third being the governor. The governor he's one person, or they are one person, but they do get to oversee they get the last mark on all of the bills that come through. And so once a bill has passed both houses, as in it's passed through if it started in the assembly, it passed the assembly committee, passed the assembly floor, moved to the Senate, went through the same process, passed the Senate committees, passed the Senate floor, and is then sent to the governor. Depending on when the bill is sent to the governor, they have an allotted amount of time where they act on the bill or not act on the bill. Most of the time, the governor will either sign the bill or veto it. If they veto the bill, that bill is essentially dead. The author or co-authors will have to start over. If the governor signs the bill, then it does become law January 1st of the next year, unless specified. Some bills have a built-in implementation date, as in saying, well, it will start in 2024 or 2029. Some bills are what we call urgency measures, and they go into law immediately. So the governor will take all of this into consideration before deciding to sign a bill. The governor may also do nothing. Now, this is rare, but there is a possibility that the governor wants a bill to enact, but doesn't want to affirmatively stamp it. And so if that becomes the case, generally after 12 days, the governor may just decide, I'm just going to hope this kind of disappears. There's no press about it, but this law will go into effect, and that will go into effect January 1st, as if the governor signed it. Governors will do certain things, like they'll do signing ceremonies for really landmark bills. They'll come, they'll make an entire display of it. Sometimes they'll sign something very, very under the table and quickly and hope it just fades into the background. And the same will happen with vetoes. Some governors will be very loud about the veto because they want to send a message. And some governors will quietly try to veto something and hope nobody notices. So, and to that question, yes, if the governor does nothing, the bill does still become law. Yes, it does. Okay, on to the next. So, legislative advocacy. I mean, this is one of the most important parts of the legislative process, and it's really the way that we all, both as lobbyists, as constituents, as concerned citizens and residents, engage with the legislators. They work for you. They are accountable to you as their constituents. They need your vote every time it comes up, as well as they need your support on the things that they're pushing. And so it's important that when you have opportunities to engage with legislators, that you try to take those opportunities when possible, and that really the collective power and ability that we have when something is introduced that we like or don't like, to make the elected officials known of it, is something that cannot be reduced. For example, legislators will always be in tune with headlines that are happening in their district. So often when I worked in the legislature, there would be a bill based upon an article that was just written, or if something got really popular during the week. Even legislators now even have people designed to monitor social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, for what people are talking about, what people are engaging on, and they're writing legislation based off of those things. So not only can your voice, just when speaking to each other, impact legislation, when you start to engage with your legislator on those mediums, when you write to their office, when you come in and let them know, we do or do not support this, I've seen this happening and I really want this change. Those are things that the legislator is going to very much take seriously. I'll say, especially working in the legislature, legislators are much more impacted by their constituents. So it's important that you know who your assembly members and senators are, and that you really get to know them, make them know your name, engage with them, and let them know that you're someone that's going to be holding them accountable as they move forward, both for the better and for the worse. And so definitely make contact with your legislator, both in their district office and through Sacramento. And really with our collective voices, we can make sure the things we want done get done this year. Okay, next one. This is it. Oh, and now I will pass over to my good friend and esteemed colleague, Kaylin. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. I don't know how to follow that, but I will do my best. Good evening, everybody. My name is Kaylin Dean. I use she, her pronouns. And like Fred, I'm a legislative advocate and lobbyist with ACLU California Action based in Sacramento. So I've been with the team for about a year now, but I've been in the legislative space for several years. Excited to just talk about the legislative calendar with you all. So the calendar for the most part is the same every year in terms of the milestones and deadlines. So we're going to talk about kind of what it looks like this year in particular and ways that you can get involved. As soon as the session ends, legislative offices begin preparing for the next session, usually around October-ish, November, and they really start hearing from constituents, advocates, and experts about what should be introduced in the next legislative session. And then they start to work together to draft bill language. Legislators have until mid-February. So in this case, this year, it happens to be tomorrow, actually, the 18th. And that's the deadline to introduce all bills. Before this bill intro deadline, bills are still being workshopped and introduced. So we can't be exactly sure what the legislative session will look like each year. Hundreds, if not thousands of bills are introduced in California each year. So this year, I think we're trending for about, folks are thinking close to 3,000. Last year, I think it was between about 25 and 2,700 bills. As Fred mentioned, after bills are introduced, they're debated and then amended in committees. So there are many standing committees such as agriculture, education, public safety, like Fred mentioned, just to name a few. And this year, committee hearings in the House of Origin will start in March and go through about May. In April, the ACLU of California will host our annual conference, where you'll have the opportunity to meet with your legislator to talk about the bills that the ACLU is co-sponsoring or otherwise supporting. In May, we'll need your help to really pressure legislators to ensure that bills pass the floor vote in their House of Origin. And so that typically happens usually closer to Memorial Day, and urgent calls and emails are often needed during this time. From there, after that, there goes into sometimes the second house, like Fred mentioned, and in July, when the legislators are on their break for summer recess, that's when we really ramp up and kick into gear. So this is another opportunity to meet with lawmakers and help make sure the bills that are set up for success succeed as they enter into their second house. We'll meet with legislators in their districts during the summer recess time, because staff at the Capitol are still up here, but then during recess, we meet with the district staff because their members are in district. Next slide. After the summer recess, the process will start back up again in the second house with committee hearings in August and floor votes also in August. We'll let you know when to call and email your legislators during this time. And bills have until August 31st to pass their second house. And then the legislative session for 2022 will roughly end, at least from the legislator side. From there, they'll go to the governor's desk, and bills that pass both houses get the chance to go to the governor's desk. And then he has roughly about a month to sign them. So he has until September 31st, and he can either sign a bill so it becomes into law, he can veto a bill, and unfortunately the bill dies, or he can choose to do nothing. And if he does nothing by September 31st, the bill actually will inadvertently get passed into law or signed into law, or it becomes law, excuse me, based on a legislative rule. And then let's not forget that this year we have general elections on November 8th. So one thing to note is everything I just said, though, is fluid. And so the legislature can move things up, they can slow things down. And so even though they might say that the floor happens in May, there are ways to get your bill to go to the floor sooner. So just wanting to flag, there's some wiggle room there. Next slide. So as I mentioned, thousands of bills are introduced in California every year. Before we transition into talking about which bills the ACLU is prioritizing this year, I'd love to tell you a little bit about why we choose these bills. The first factor in determining if we will support, co-sponsor, and prioritize a bill is if it's related to our work and helps to advance our long-term goals, civil liberties, as well as civil rights. So our work tends to fall into about 10 different categories: criminal justice, which Fred is one of the lobbyists for, police practices, which I'm the lobbyist for, technology and civil liberties, democracy and civic engagement, disability rights, education equity, immigrants' rights, gender, sexuality, and reproductive justice, and then the last one is racial and economic justice. Within these issue areas, there's many bills, and unfortunately, we're not able to focus on all of them, but we do try and look at every single bill that comes into the legislative session. We make decisions about where to focus based on a large number of factors, including but not limited to the impact we believe the bill will have on Californians, our legislative work so that it should continue building off of local work and serve to support partner organizations. We also want to make sure that the bills that we focus on are supported and asked for by directly impacted communities and have a broad base of support from community partners who invite our participation. Also, our ledge work should continue to build off of local work and serving our partner organizations. And another thing is that aside from bills that we choose to sponsor or support, we also spend a good amount of time working on bills that could cause harm or hinder the civil liberties of Californians. And for those bills, we might take an opposition position where we'll either try and fix it or we'll try and make it better so it's not harmful. Now let's talk about two big wins from last year. So the first one, if you've joined us on legislative advocacy over the past 2 years, these bills should be familiar to you. We talked with legislators about the bill called SB 2 during last year's conference and during the summer recess lobby visits. So for those who don't know, SB 2 created a pathway to revoke the certification of law enforcement, specifically for a law enforcement officer who commits serious crimes such as excessive force, sexual misconduct, or dishonesty. This was a huge deal for California because up until this point, we were actually only one of 4 states that did not have a process to actually decertify police. And we did this work thanks to the hard work of volunteers like you, our community partners, and directly impacted families. So thank you to the folks who are on this call. An incredibly diverse group of partners joined to form the Let Us Live Coalition, and we worked together to get this bill passed. Many of these organizations are working today with directly impacted people or are made up of those who are the most vulnerable in our communities. And they're doing this work sometimes without pay. They're doing this kind of work without prestige, clout, funding that the ACLU does tend to have. So when talking about this bill, we must take a moment to really acknowledge and thank folks just for bringing this bill to us and for allowing us to partner with them and for bringing this bill across the finish line. The Let Us Live Coalition is also very intentional about including and representing families who have been impacted by police violence. So we strive to follow their leadership as we move bills. You may also be familiar with the Crisis Act, also known as AB 118. We've been working on this bill for the last 2 years, and it essentially created a pilot program to promote community-based responses to local emergency situations. And so these responses were actually as alternatives to police response. Community-based organizations have the expertise, the relationships, the networks, and also the trust of their communities, and therefore they're best served to meet the needs of their community. So by investing in their ability to respond to these local crises, we've been able to improve the health and safety of the whole community, and in particular, vulnerable populations. So happy to say that this act was signed into law. And then we were also able to secure a $10 million grant allocation from the state budget. And that's for the 3-year pilot program. So I want to take a moment again to acknowledge all of our partners who worked on this effort, as well as the directly impacted families who lent their time and support. Thank you. I'll pass to Tanisha.
Thank you, Kaylin. So I'm now going to talk about some of the bills that we think we'll be working on this year. This is just a little bit of a teaser in the hopes that you'll stay with us and stay engaged. So I am Tanisha Humphrey. I've been emailing you. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Grassroots Advocacy Manager here at ACLU NorCal. So these are some new bills that I want to be talking to you about. Well, actually, the first bill is a re-up of an old bill, but it might be new to you. It's new to me. So the first bill that I wanted to talk about is, again, a re-up of an old bill. So in 2019, we worked together to pass AB 1215. AB 1215 prohibits the use of facial recognition by law enforcement on their officer worn body cams. So we passed this bill that said law enforcement can't use facial recognition and other biometric surveillance on their body cam footage. However, this bill will end January of next year, January of 2023, unless we act now. We must continue protecting the civil rights of Californians, ensuring that body cameras are used to hold police accountable and not for mass surveillance. Right? Body cameras are meant to be a tool of accountability. They were asked for by directly impacted families when an impartial witness was needed. They're not meant to be used against those communities or to surveil the communities that need that accountability. Okay, so that's the first bill. The second bill I wanted to talk to you about is AB 1608, which concerns sheriff's office and coroner's offices. So every county in California has a sheriff's department, but not all sheriff's departments in California are separate from the coroner or medical examiner's office. In some counties, those offices are together. So this bill proposes a consistent statewide policy that requires counties to have a coroner's office or medical office that is separate and independent from the sheriff. So this is important because it will help to ensure that medical examinations and investigations of sudden, violent, unexplained, or suspicious deaths are conducted objectively. This will increase transparency around misconduct and limit the influence of law enforcement bias. So if there's a sudden or unexplained death, the folks that resulted from the police, law enforcement, sheriff, custody, the folks who are investigating that death will now be separate from the sheriff and law enforcement. Okay, the next bill I wanted to talk to you about is around racist place names. It involves a slur that I'm going to be very careful not to say. So there are currently geographic features and place names in the state of California that bear the name of an offensive, racist, derogatory, and sexist slur. It sexualizes, degrades, and dehumanizes Native women. Many Native American leaders, organizations, and Indian tribes have called for the removal of this word from public places for more than a decade, many decades, in fact, because of the detrimental impact this word has on Indigenous communities. So this bill will establish a procedure to identify and rename all places that have this word in their name. Can I ask one of the hosts to let folks in from the waiting room? I'm not able to do it right now. Thanks, y'all. Yes, you can keep it rolling. So the next bill I wanted to talk to you about is the Racial Justice Act. And I know a lot of you were with us last year, so you're already familiar with this bill, but in case you're not, this bill is another re-up of an old bill, or it's a furthering of a bill that we worked on. So in 2020, we passed AB 2542. And AB 2542 is known as the Racial Justice Act. And what the Racial Justice Act says is it prohibits racial discrimination and seeking or obtaining criminal convictions or sentences, right? It acknowledges that racism is a part of our courts, and it says that if racism was part of your conviction or your sentence, then you have a right to challenge that conviction or sentence. But the Racial Justice Act only applied to people from 2021 forward. So what this bill, the bill we're actually talking about, AB 256 does, is it extends those same protections to folks who have already been convicted or sentenced. So we worked really hard on this bill last year. We met with legislators about it multiple times. We put a lot of pressure behind it, but we didn't quite make it. This bill got stopped in the Senate Appropriations Committee. So it didn't die, but it was held, therefore making it a 2-year bill. So now we need your help. We have to keep that same pressure on, or if anything, intensify it even more to make sure it actually gets out of the Appropriations Committee and onto the Senate floor, where it will hopefully pass that floor and get signed into law. So if you were familiar with the Racial Justice Act, if you were as excited about it as I was, then you have more opportunities to get involved. For example, you can sign this petition to tell your senator to support the Racial Justice Act. And if you're thinking, Tanisha, I already signed this petition, you might have, or you might have signed the petition that told your assembly member to support the Racial Justice Act, because right, it had to go through the assembly first, and then it made its way through the Senate. So just in case, do me a favor, sign the petition again. I'd appreciate it. If you're doing it twice, no harm done, right? But if you haven't done it, I know you want to. I hope you want to. I hope you'll join us. Okay, so I've seen lots of great questions in the chat. We're going to take a pause to address questions now about the legislative process, about the bills that we have talked about while we have our California Action colleagues here. And then after we take a few questions now, and I'm going to say we're going to do this for 5 to 10 minutes, but I'm going to keep an eye on the time. After we take a few questions now, We'll go back into the presentation, tell you about how to get involved, and then have another round of question answering. So if your question doesn't get answered now, it is okay. We'll get to it. Okay, so I am going to call out a few questions that I saw in the chat that I want to make sure we're answering. Actually, Katie, if you were keeping track of those 2 questions, I said, like, let's answer that later. Do you think you could let us know what those were?
Yes, one of the first ones at the top, someone wanted to know if we can talk about suspense. The suspense file, definitely an appropriations committee. They wanted to make
Gotcha.
sure we cover that first. That was the first one.
Gotcha. So I definitely invite Kaylin and Fred to reflect, or I'm happy to take this one.
Sure, I think that's a bit of a process question. So I'll start, and then Kaylin, if you want to hop on as well. So the suspense file is a place that I would say 80% of all the bills introduced end up on the suspense file. So it is certainly common. On the suspense file is where the chairs of appropriations on both houses may put bills that carry a larger price tag. Now, when I say larger, it's in context because we're looking at sometimes even under $1 million threshold, but bills that carry a larger price tag will all go to the suspense file and then will be released from the suspense file all at once in a hearing called the suspense hearing. Now, this hearing, there is no public comment. It's simply the way it's been lately is that the chair of appropriations will read off the bills that are allowed to keep moving and may or may not read off the bills that are done. The process is a bit secretive. It is kind of all at once, and it's something that we all kind of prepare for throughout the entire year. Kaylin, did you want to add?
Yep, that was great. Just a couple other pieces. I think when we talk about the threshold, the monetary threshold that automatically kind of triggers when a bill will go on the suspense file, the Senate, I believe it's 50,000, and then the Assembly, it's 150,000. So to Fred's point, super small amounts when you think about it. And then I don't know if we said this, but this is usually the place where we joke, this is where the bills go to die. So this is what they say within the field.
Thank you both so much. We also had a question around how a bill becomes a 2-year bill. Do you want to talk about that? No.
Sorry, I was reading, sorry, I got sidetracked. I'm happy to start, Fred, and then if you want to tag team. So I think Tanisha, I believe, did respond to the question in the chat, so I will keep that consistent because that was the answer. So basically it's, if it can be a tactic, it can be a strategy. So if it looks like the bill is having a hard time moving, or if it looks like opposition is getting ready to kill it, or if it's just clear that when we're trying to secure the votes, you can tell that we don't have the votes. Like people are saying, no, I'm on the fence, or you haven't gotten enough yeses when you do kind of the pre-legwork. The author's office has the ability to kind of park the bill. So there's deadlines associated with it, but ultimately, as long as they make some of these milestone deadlines and let either the committee chair know, or they could stop it before it goes to the floor. As long as they do that before it goes through the committee or before it goes to the floor and it dies, then they can actually pick it back up again the following year. The caveat though is it can only be done in a 2-year bill cycle. So what that means is, let's say this year we happen to be in the second of a 2-year bill cycle. So what that means is some of the bills you heard us talk about today, AB 1608, unfortunately, if that dies, or actually regardless, the author does not have the opportunity to hold it, it would just die if it's unsuccessful. And we would have to start the effort again with a brand new bill number the following year or later on. Fred, anything to add?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. I will say a bill becoming a 2-year bill is not always a bad thing. Sometimes an author will do it just because they need more time to work something out, or maybe they're monitoring another board or commission to see what they do, and then holding their bill to see, if these actions happen on their own. Also, a bill can be made a 2-year bill because the author decided to put a different policy in that bill. And so they might have started with one thing, something else piqued their interest, and they said, okay, well, I'm gonna park this, and next year I'm gonna pick this up, but I'm gonna do something completely different. And so those are things that are all possible. And yes, the bills this year that have just been introduced are not eligible because we're already in the second year. So all bills in the first year do have that ability though.
Okay. Does anyone want to raise their hand or write in the chat if you have additional questions?
There is one more in there. Somebody asking a specific question about the plan to oppose COVID vaccine mandate bills, specifically SB 871 and AB 1993. Did anybody want to take that one?
I can take this one, and I apologize. This actually might be one of the ones that we need to do a takeaway so that we get back to folks after the fact. Each of the lobbyists are kind of assigned different bills based on issue area. And so this is outside of kind of our purview, Fred and mine. And so I don't think we're able to speak to the status of those right now, but we'd be happy to take it as a takeaway and ask the assigned lobbyist, who's actually the one who gives leadership, I believe, to all of the lobbyists. It's our state government affairs director. So just sorry, we can't offer up what the position will be or any information about that just because we haven't taken a look.
And I'll also point your attention to the resource that Luis just put in the chat around the ACLU's take on civil liberties and vaccine mandates. And that's an important resource that you can take a look at and read through. And I'll absolutely provide that resource and any answer we're able to get to that question in the follow-up materials. I'm going to send a follow-up email tonight with these slides and some additional resources. So I'll include our take on vaccine mandates, but I won't be able to include that answer just yet. If I get an answer for you, I'll follow up with everyone. Okay, y'all don't have any more questions? I'm like genuinely surprised. I see another one in the chat. Of the 3,000 or so bills, how many have significant impact on Californians? How many does the ACLU NorCal pick up for lobbying?
So for the numerical question, let's use last year as an example. I think, again, it was somewhere between I think it was about right around 2,500 of all the bills that were introduced last year. I believe ACLU took positions on about between 600 to 700. And so again, we do take a look at the bills, but then there might be some that I'll give you an example. One bill this year is trying to make indentations to the bill language, which is like a format structure thing. And there's also a plugin, is my understanding, to actually do some of this. And so that's an example of a bill that we might not take a position on. So we do try and screen them all, but in terms of what we actually spend the time prioritizing, the numbers are significantly less. But I will say there's no, what's the word? There's no formula for it though. So we don't set out and say, okay, if there's 3,000 introduced this year, here's the number that we'll take a position on. It's really just based on what the bill language is and what the bill will do.
I will say on the organizing team, I usually pick less than 10 bills to focus on throughout the year. And that is a strategic decision just to make sure that we actually have the time to dig deep into these bills, because none of us are spending our all day, every day working on bills the way that Kaylin and Frederick do. So we have a lot of respect for their expertise and rely on them to sort of guide us about which bills might need our support the most. And we have to carefully balance when we talk to legislators about various bills. So even if there is a bill that the ACLU supports, if it wouldn't be strategic, we don't want to be talking to legislators about it always. So I really appreciate when chapters and volunteers come and ask about, what's going on in a bill, and is this one where we can be active? I really appreciate those questions, and I'm always happy to take them. I saw a hand up and I see 2 questions in the chat that I like. And if you have more questions, please do put them in the chat, but I think those 3 are going to be our final ones for this section. Yeah, on the phone.
Hi, my name is Mike Levinson. I have a question on a bill I heard about the other day, and I don't know if it's on your list. SB 1106. It has to do with expungement and it sounded like it was more financial, so people wouldn't have to pay back fees and debts, and didn't necessarily sound like it was designed to wipe things off their record, but I couldn't tell from the description I heard him make.
Okay. That might have to be another one-on-one follow-up, Mike. Do you mind if I reach out to you and let you know what we think
No.
about that one?
No, he's my senator, so I might as well find out what's going on.
Great. Hi, Mike. Good to hear from you. Thanks for the question.
Okay.
All right, I'll get back to you.
All right.
I love this question from Anne about how the backlash against CJ reform will play out legislatively. Mhm.
I mean, truthfully, we will see. These are things that are kind of difficult to predict. And the reason being is that, you know, it is a very headline-driven industry, the legislator. But as we know in today's society, headlines move really fast. So between now and even the summer, there could be other things that are now kind of more forward-facing or taking up a lot of legislators' attention that may push some of that backlash into the hindsight. I would say that's kind of a hope we have, but right now it does seem as if there are a lot more punitive bills being introduced by members. There's a little bit more punitive sentiment going on. And if you look, it's really something that California goes in waves. Every so often we do run into times when the voters or the members seem to just be in a real carceral mood. And so we kind of are on one of those waves right now. But like I said, we're doing a lot of things now to try to counter some of those narratives, try to provide some statistics, trying to disavow some of that negative propaganda, and to show that there are other and better ways to create public safety other than just incarcerating more people. There are ways in which we can provide more services on the front end, more diversion on the front end to ensure that the true public safety goals are being met. So we shall see, but that is a wonderful question.
I also think, you know, there is this narrative being told to lawmakers about, yes, that there's a backlash against criminal justice reform. And I definitely think the role of volunteers will be extremely important in countering that narrative and saying, like, as your constituents, we don't agree with that. And so we are going to be asking you, like, call in, let them know that that's not right and that's not how you feel and those don't reflect your values. Okay. All right, y'all. The last question we're going to take in this moment, and again, we'll have more time after for more questions if you have them. Rachel asked if there are significant additional ways to get involved in working and volunteering on these bills, which is an excellent tie-in for Kim to talk about more ways to get involved. And I will say we're going to keep working on these bills throughout the year. Kim's going to talk about some opportunities to get involved, but if you have an appetite and you want to take on even more, Rachel, I know you have an appetite to take on even more. We can talk about that and we can do that.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Tanisha, for passing it off to me. And thank you everyone for so much for your questions. We're really excited that all of you are really interested and really curious. As Tanisha was saying, I'd like to talk to you about a few ways to get involved and a really mini quick intro about who I am. I'm Kim. I use the She series. Last year, I was a NorCal ACLU lobby captain, and I am also the Cal ACLU 504 Task Force Director. So the Cal ACLU is a collegiate branch at Berkeley of the ACLU, and that's actually how I got involved with the lobby captains part. Next slide, please. Okay, so share your story. So advocates like us are the heart of the ACLU's legislative advocacy. So please share your story to help us recruit more volunteers. Use the form in the chat to talk about the legislative win that you are the most proud of. And for some reference, your answer may be posted on the ACLU social media platforms. So I also wanted to share the legislative one that I'm most proud of. So last year, my team and I were especially excited to advocate for the Crisis Act to Senator Dodd, who's one of the bill's co-authors, actually. And this bill created a pilot grant program for community-based responses to local emergency situations. I want to emphasize that we as a community know what's best in providing for our safety and our needs, as we can offer the support and resources created by and for our community. I greatly appreciate the enthusiasm and love my team express, advocating alongside passionate advocates from all different backgrounds across the state, which is really, really exciting to meet everyone on that field. Our grassroots efforts for community-based program to our state representatives emphasize the importance of mobilizing and working at the ground level, so at the base where we can speak on issues that matter to us. And with our work within the ACLU and our community partners, the Crisis Act passed to prioritize community-based response for the people. I just want to emphasize even more, our voices really do matter. So I really applaud all of your commitment to advocacy, coming out here on a Thursday night to learn more about how you can get involved in your state legislature and to promote civil rights. Also, as I said before, just want a quick plug again, share your answers with us using the form about how, about which legislative wins you are the most proud of. Next slide, please. So are you looking for more ways to get involved? So here are some upcoming events because you're in luck. We have 2 upcoming events that you should be sure to attend because you know I'll definitely be there as well. So this is a very important election year in California because in most counties, there will be district attorney elections. To learn more about the role of the DA, which is district attorney, and why this is a particularly important role and how to get involved in activism, join us next Tuesday, February 22nd at 5:30 p.m. for our DA elections kickoff. They already put the link to register in the chat, so please feel free to register. Now, moving on to the second way to get involved. This year, our annual California Action Conference will be from April 19th to April 29th. In Northern California, we'll spend a week diving deeper into important topics for the year, such as the upcoming elections. Then you'll also have the amazing opportunity to meet with your state senator and assembly member to talk about these important bills. So please save the date in calendars and look out for registration links soon. Next slide, please. So now let's go into feedback. So tell us what you thought about today's training. Was it good? Ways you could improve? Anything that you could tell us? So on the screen, you should see a poll question asking for your feedback at this time. Let me know if the tech is working because I can't see it on my end. Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to highlight the first question is, was tonight's training content relevant and useful? And the options are, yes, it was very relevant and useful. Second option is yes, but there could have been more done. And the last option is no. So feel free to submit. I'll give you a few time just so that we can read the results out. Okay, so it seems like 72% said it was really relevant and useful, and 20% said it could be better. I'm glad no one said no, though. That's a really good start. And as Tanisha said in the chat, if you think it could be better, let us know how. We're always open for feedback and for improvement. So the second question is, would you share this information with a friend? And the first option is yes, everyone should totally see this. And the second option is no. As a personal bias, I hope you say everyone should see this because it's really important for us to all advocate. Okay, let's wait for the results. Okay, 92% said everyone should see this and 8% said no. Well, I hope you can change your mind soon. If you have additional feedback, again, feel free to let us know in the chat or even afterwards and send out an email. So now let's move on to the third question. So after this training, how likely are you to take further action? The first option is very likely, second option is somewhat likely, third option is not very likely, and the last one is not at all likely. Sure, while I'm waiting, I can repeat the second event that I mentioned. It's the annual California Action Conference from April 19th to 29th. And that's the week that we will dive into important topics where you can meet your state senator and assembly member to also talk about the important bills. The registration link should be out soon. So for the results for question number 3, after this training, how likely are you to take further action? 84% of you said very likely, and 16% said somewhat likely. So I'm really glad we have a lot of passionate, interested activists after this call. We'll definitely be following up. And the last question, let's get into that. What bills are you most interested in taking further action? Keep in mind that you could select multiple bills if you're interested in multiple bills. And the options are what we talked about today. The first one is biometric surveillance. Second is separate sheriff's and coroner's office. Third option is racist place names. And last option is Racial Justice Act 2.0. Wow, so we have 83% Racial Justice Act 2.0 coming in first. We're most excited. For 62% for separating sheriff and coroner's office as second. Third most interested is biometric surveillance at 45%. And at the also most interested for fourth place is 41% for racist place names. So I'm really glad that everybody's really excited and passionate about these bills. So moving on to the last slide. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. You have no idea how important this is, and we really, really appreciate all your time and all of your advocacy. So if you have any additional questions, the organizing staff will stay on for an additional 10 minutes to answer them, or you can email changemakers@aclunc.org. But otherwise, thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your night, and I look forward to working with you, and thank you for your commitment to advocacy. See you.